Hey guys, it's Friday, April 9th, and we are on U.S. history, and we are on page 466, doing pages 466 through 472 today. You're also doing your homework on page 472, 8 through 15, and page 476, 1 through 10. So on page 466, we're talking about the Pacific Theater today, 1942 to 1945, and really this is backing up. We talked about the end of Hitler yesterday. This is more focused on Japan and what happened to them throughout the war in the Philippines and that whole area. So some of the important parts of this are about General MacArthur, who was fighting in the Philippines here, and he had a real heart, it seemed like, to do well in the Philippines, but he was actually forced to leave the Philippines whenever their army was exhausted. It says this: President Roosevelt ordered General MacArthur to quit the Philippines and to proceed to Australia to form a new army group. He left Bataan under the cover of darkness by motor torpedo boat on March 11, 1942. But he promised the Filipinos, "I shall return." Lacking food and water and suffering from malaria, the American forces on Bataan had little choice but to surrender on April 9th. The 11,000 men on Corregidor, the fortified island which guarded the entrance to Manila Bay, fought on alone against overwhelming odds until May 6th. The American prisoners from Bataan and Corregidor were forced by their Japanese captors to walk many miles to prison camps. This march came to be known as the Bataan Death March, because the Japanese shot or bayoneted those prisoners who fell out of line of march due to disease, wounds, hunger, or fatigue. If it had not been for the heroic defense of the Philippines, the Japanese might have swept ahead to even greater conquest in the winter and spring of 1942. So what you see here is Japanese warfare and how brutal it is. So when you go back and you watch Japanese training videos during this time, they really believed in winning at any cost. Think about Pearl Harbor. This is where it starts, right? Pearl Harbor was not just an attack by airplanes shooting missiles. Many of these planes would kamikaze, dive bomb, and kill themselves just to cause damage and kill other people. This is the whole Japanese outlook on war. Win at any cost. And whenever they got these prisoners of war and they sent them on this death march, if anyone these people weren't being fed good, they weren't being hydrated well, there was disease and all of these things, and if anyone couldn't keep up, they just got bayoneted, stabbed, or shot right there. And many people were angered by the treatment of soldiers, because this went against pretty much modern rules of engagement, rules of war that were pretty much universally understood during this time. So it was pretty bad time to be a prisoner of war, especially if you were a prisoner of the Japanese. So it goes on and it talks about a lot of important battles here. The Battle of Midway is one of them, and there's plenty of other ones there that I want you to read about. It talks about the American strategy of island hopping and strategic islands that we made sure we had control of, and that is all very important. And the most important part of this, let me back up for a second before I talk about that. There's also a picture on page 471 of the Marines raising the flag at Iwo Jima. And that is a classic American symbol, the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. And if you didn't know from what point in history that was, it is World War II, and it is this time in history. So you're going to definitely read about that. The biggest part of this section is on page 471 on the right side, where we start talking about the atomic bomb. Because this really changes how warfare is thought of forever. And even today, we really worry about the effects of a nuclear war. So it says that in an agonizing decision, President Truman, because President Truman had been elected at this time, finally decided to use the atomic bomb against Japan in order to save the lives of American servicemen, which would have been spent in an invasion of Japan. So one thing to remember right before this is the Chinese, Chiang Kai-shek, and President Truman had got together and they had issued the Potsdam Declaration, and it was basically calling upon the Japanese to give up with no terms, just give up now or else. And so whenever we issued that, it was the last warning for Japan. They did not heed it. They continued to do what they weren't supposed to be doing. And so President Truman made the decision here that if I have to send American troops into Japan, how many casualties is that going to be? And they knew it was going to be a ton of casualties. So even though he knew that the atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki were going to cause tons of civilian casualties, he thought to himself, you know, how many casualties are going to be for American lives and Allied lives if I don't do this? And so at this point in history, he put the lives of American troops and Allied troops ahead of the lives of Axis civilians, specifically Japanese civilians and Japanese military people. And I think rightly so. I think he made the right call. So when he drops the bombs here on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese see that there was a devastating effect upon these places, and they knew that they could not hold out any longer. And this quickly brings the end of the war in Japan on VJ Day, which is Victory Over Japan Day, September 2nd, 1945. An interesting part about this is that the Manhattan Project, which was kind of what gave us the atomic bomb, it was the largest research and scientific effort of its day. During the 1930s, the Germans took an early lead in atomic research, but the persecution of Jews and other Nazi oppressions had driven many talented nuclear physicists to refuge in the U.S. German-born Jewish physicist Albert Einstein wrote a letter to President Roosevelt in 1939 warning him that the Germans might produce an atomic weapon and that the U.S. should begin research in this area. So what's interesting about this is that Albert Einstein was actually German-born, and he was probably one of the greatest minds that's ever lived, and he actually turned America on to the research for the atomic bomb. Had Hitler not persecuted Jews in Germany, it's possible that Einstein might have helped develop an atomic bomb in Germany before America had one. And then you could have seen the whole landscape of the war change, and who knows, it could be a lot different today. So let's thank God that it all worked out according to his plan. That's the end of this section though, guys. I want you to read the pages and do the homework. Page 472, 8 through 15, page 476, 1 through 10. Good Friday tomorrow, so this is our last lesson for the week. Hope you guys enjoy your 3-day weekend, and I will catch you next time. Love you. See you later.